Silence isn't weakness, it's a weapon few know how to use. And sometimes, the loudest move you can make, is no move at all. In a world that never stops talking, where opinions echo louder than truth, staying silent may seem like surrender, but in reality, it's one of the boldest strategies you can use. The more you try to explain yourself, the more it looks like you're on the defensive. The more you react, the more power you hand over. And when you try too hard to prove yourself, what does it really prove? That they got you. That you've been rattled. Let's be honest. When your words are weaponized, when facts are distorted, when your reaction becomes entertainment, you're no longer in a conversation. You're in a psychological battle. And the louder you get, the more you've already lost. But here's the twist most people miss. You don't have to fight back. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to explain yourself to be right. You only need one thing, silence and time. Because the moment you stop, karma starts to speak. You go quiet, but the universe doesn't. Truth has gravity, and sooner or later, it pulls everything back into alignment. In this video, we'll break down 7 powerful situations where the wisest response isn't a response at all. These are moments when silence isn't passive, it's protective. It's not about fear, it's about strength. It's how you guard your energy, preserve your dignity, and let people face the weight of their own actions, without lifting a single finger. Because silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of control. Stick with me until the final chapter, because that last example will completely change the way you see silence, forever. Now, let's begin with the first and most emotionally charged situation. When you're lied about. When your name is dragged through the dirt. When people believe things that aren't true. Your instinct to defend, to correct, to clear your name. But here's what most never realize. The more you explain, the more you look like you have something to hide. That's the cruel paradox. You try to clear your name, only to look guilty. You search for clarity, only to find yourself tangled in chaos. Why? Because the people spreading lies aren't searching for truth. They're not interested in your side of the story. They're not listening. They're watching. Watching for the crack in your voice, the flicker in your eyes, the moment your calm slips, and their power grows. They're not after answers. They're after your reaction. They want to disrupt your stillness, to shake your peace, to poke until you flinch. Because when you rise to defend yourself, when you perform your innocence, they twist it into guilt. Your truth becomes their performance. And suddenly, you're not speaking to clarify. You're speaking to survive. And that's the trap. Because the moment you react, you've already lost. This is the moment where Stoicism doesn't just speak, it stands. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not true, do not say it. If it is not right, do not do it." Simple, sharp, final. You don't need to beg. You don't need to justify. You don't owe them a performance. You answer only to your integrity, not their distorted version of your life. Because there's one thing truth always has. That lies never will: endurance. Lies move like wildfire, fast, loud, and dramatic. But they burn out quickly. They rely on attention, and once that fades, so do they. Truth moves slower, quieter, But it doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a defense team. It just needs time, and it will always reveal itself. Let me tell you a story. There was a man, let's call him James. One day, James was accused of something at work. Something serious. Something he didn't do. Whispers started. Eyes narrowed. People kept their distance. His first impulse? To speak up. To shout his innocence. To chase every person down and plead his side. But he didn't. Instead, James stayed calm. He showed up. Did his job. Didn't retaliate. Didn't gossip. Didn't flinch. And then, a few weeks later, the truth emerged. The accuser, exposed, revealed to have lied about others in the past. Their credibility shattered. And James? Because he never fought back. Because he never lost his composure. He never lost face. He rose above the noise. And when the dust settled, his dignity remained untouched. That's Stoic strength. Not loud. Not defensive. Just unshakable. Now imagine, what would have happened if James had reacted? Yelled. Argued. Posted. Would it have helped? Or just added fire to fiction? Silence, when chosen with intention, becomes more powerful than any speech. And that brings us to the next moment where silence becomes strength, not weakness. Let's move into a situation we've all faced, when someone disrespects you, publicly or privately. So what do you do when the truth finally returns, on its own terms, in its own time? You stay still. You stay grounded. You let it land. Because when someone lies about you, when your name is thrown into the fire of falsehoods, your instinct might be to shout, to explain, to run after every whisper trying to snuff it out. But that's not how truth wins. That's how exhaustion begins. Instead, here's what you do: you trust the long game. Lies scream. But truth? It walks quietly, and arrives fully. So step 1, trust that time is doing its quiet, invisible work. The falsehood may echo now, but it has no roots. What is fake burns fast. What is real remains. Step 2, anchor yourself. When the noise rises, the only thing that holds is your internal compass. When you know who you are, truly, deeply, consistently, no lie can shake that foundation. You stop looking for confirmation. You stop needing validation. Because you know, your worth is not up for debate. Step 3, let karma speak on your behalf. Those who weave deception often do so habitually. They live in patterns of chaos, drama, manipulation. And eventually, their lies twist back toward them. They trap themselves in a narrative so unstable, so tangled, that it collapses under its own weight. And you remain untouched. Because you didn't enter the ring. You didn't play their game. You didn't trade your peace for a temporary victory. At the end of the day, silence is not surrender. It's self-respect. It's the quiet declaration that says, I know who I am. And I don't need to shout to prove it. Let them talk. Let them twist the story. Let them spin their fiction. And you? You rise above it, gracefully. Because the truth has a way of circling back. Always. But what happens when the wound isn't just a lie? What if it cuts deeper? What if it's betrayal? Not just a rumor, but a rupture. not just a whisper, but a war within. What do you do when the ones you trusted the most, friends, family, even the person you loved, turn away and leave you reeling? Because in that moment, the one when you walk away without a single word, that's when they finally understand. They didn't just lose access to your voice. They lost access to your soul. And nothing echoes louder than absence. Seneca once wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." And betrayal? That's friction in its rawest form. It burns. It scars. But more than anything, it clarifies. It peels back the illusion and reveals the truth. It forces you to see what you didn't want to believe. Not everyone you love is meant to stay. That's a brutal lesson. But it's also a gift, because once the dust settles, you no longer carry people who were only ever holding you back. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman, we'll call her Sarah. She had a best friend, 10 years of memories. Late night calls, whispered dreams, celebrated wins, shared griefs. They were inseparable. Until one day, Sarah discovered something that felt like a knife to the chest. That friend, the one she trusted with everything, had betrayed her. She didn't just reveal Sarah's secrets. She sabotaged her success, quietly, cleverly, and with intent. Why? Out of jealousy? Insecurity? A bruised ego? Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. Sarah's first instinct? Rage. She wanted to storm in. To scream, to shame. To show her just how much pain she had caused. But then, Sarah chose silence. No confrontation. No dramatic closure. Just a graceful exit. She picked up her dignity and walked away. And what happened next was telling. The friend waited. She braced herself for chaos, for shouting, blame, retaliation. But none of that came. All she got was absence. And that silence? It stayed with her. Because silence has gravity. It pulls at the mind. It lingers in the room like a ghost. And long after the words would have faded, the silence remained. So when betrayal comes knocking on your door, and one day, it likely will, remember this. First, accept the truth of who they are now. Not who you hoped they were. Not the version you built in your mind. That person, the one you loved, trusted, believed in, no longer exists. Stop arguing with the memory. Second, don't waste your breath. Don't try to rewrite your worth in their eyes. They already penciled in your value, and people who write in pencil are quick to erase. You don't need to explain what they refuse to see. Because there's a kind of power that doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It just walks away, with its head high, and its soul intact. But betrayal has a cousin, rejection. It's softer, subtler, but it cuts just as deep. What do you do when the door you prayed would open stays shut? Because third, and this part matters more than most, you walk away without explanation. Not to punish. Not to confuse. But because silence forces reflection. And reflection is the very thing most betrayers fear the most. See. Your absence becomes their mirror. No more words to argue with. No more attention to feed their ego. Just space. Space where guilt echoes louder than confrontation ever could. And in that space, they're left to live with what they lost. Not through revenge, but through your peace. Because you weren't just anyone. You were loyal. You were real. You were rare. And they lost you. Let that truth sit where it belongs, with them. Now, from betrayal, we shift to something just as sharp but often more public: insults. They come fast. They come cheap. Because that's what weak people use when they're out of depth. Insults don't seek truth. They seek control. Whether it's sarcasm, passive aggression, or a direct verbal jab, the goal is the same. To provoke. To poke until you react. Because your reaction, that's their validation. And the second you raise your voice, argue back, defend your character, you've already handed them what they wanted. Your power. It doesn't matter if your comeback is clever. If you respond, you've played their game. But here's the Stoic twist that most people miss. You don't have to win the argument. You just need to not enter it. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Read that again, slowly. Because when someone hurls an insult, they're really handing you an invitation. An invitation to come down to their level. To roll in the mud. To abandon your dignity. But a Stoic doesn't live in the mud. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't snap. He doesn't seek to clap back. He observes. Calm, still, unbothered. Let me tell you a story. There was a man, we'll call him David. He had just received a long overdue promotion at a company event. The room applauded. People smiled. Except for one co-worker, whose pride couldn't take it. Later that night, in front of others, this co-worker delivered a cutting remark, drenched in sarcasm, meant to humiliate, to diminish. All eyes turned to David, waiting for his reaction. And do you know what he did? Nothing. No snide remark, no roll of the eyes. Not even a shrug. He simply raised his glass, and smiled. The room shifted. That silence? It didn't look like weakness. It looked like power. Because David stayed where his dignity lived, above it. Insults sting, but they only scar if you let them. In the next chapter, we'll talk about one of the hardest forms of silence. The kind you hold not for others, but for yourself. When the world misunderstands your dreams, your goals, your path, and you choose to protect them in silence. Let's turn to that now. You see, in that moment of public tension, a jealous co-worker took a jab at David right in front of everyone. A mocking tone, a smirk, and the words, "Wow, I guess they're giving promotions to just anyone now." The insult was sharp. The room fell silent. Every head turned. People held their breath, waiting for David's response. Would he snap back? Would he defend himself? Would he fire off some clever remark to settle the score? But David did none of that. He looked the man directly in the eyes, held the moment, then smiled, and said absolutely nothing. No comeback. No anger. No drama. Just calm, steady silence. And in that stillness, David didn't just win the room. He won the war. Because silence? It doesn't just ignore the insult. It strips it of power. And nothing, frustrates an insulter more than being ignored. They came to feed on your reaction. And when you give them nothing, they leave empty-handed. So how do you deal with insults? How do you disarm that kind of cheap attack? First, recognize what they're fishing for. They don't want the truth. They want your energy, your peace, your reaction. Don't let them have it. Second, let your stillness speak. When your eyes stay calm, when your voice stays low, when your face doesn't even twitch, it sends a message louder than any words could. You don't control me. Third, hold your frame. Confidence doesn't argue. Self-respect doesn't explain. Dignity doesn't rise to provocation. Because when you refuse to lower yourself, they have nowhere to rise to. No stage, no spotlight, no power. At the end of the day, you don't need to match their noise. You only need to master your silence. Because real strength doesn't yell. It doesn't scramble to prove anything. It simply stands, unshaken. And sometimes, the most devastating response to an insult isn't a witty comeback or a sharp reply. It's pure indifference. But silence isn't just a weapon against others. It can also be a shield for your dreams. What happens when people mock your ambition, belittle your goals, or doubt your path? Do you defend it? Or do you protect it quietly, until it's undeniable? Silence may shield you from insults. But what about manipulation? What do you do when someone doesn't want truth, they want control? Let's talk about one of the most deceptive tactics of all, playing the victim. Some people aren't looking for resolution. They're not trying to fix the problem, find understanding, or build bridges. They're looking for a spotlight. They twist the story, edit their role out, and with just the right tone of sadness, they turn the entire narrative upside down. Suddenly, you're the villain. They're the misunderstood one. Tears replace accountability. Sympathy replaces responsibility. And truth? Truth becomes collateral damage. And the more you try to explain, the more you feed the performance. Because from the outside, it doesn't look like clarification. It looks like attack. They've flipped the script, and you didn't even see it coming. You're no longer in a disagreement. You're in a drama. This is not conflict. It's performance. And without realizing it, you've just been cast as the enemy in their show. This is why Stoic wisdom is so important here. Epictetus once said, "To complain is always non-productive and never appropriate." Because people who perform as victims don't complain to solve. They complain to gather an audience. And when you defend yourself against an act, you validate the entire stage. So what do? You don't play. You don't explain. You don't engage. You let silence do what logic can't. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman, let's call her Rachel. She had a co-worker who made drama an art form. Every time she was held accountable, she didn't reflect. She cried. She deflected. She pointed fingers at everyone but herself. Rachel, in good faith, tried to stay rational. She brought facts. Emails. Receipts. She explained clearly, kindly, and calmly. But every single time, it backfired. Because Rachel was speaking logic, while the other woman was speaking emotion. And in the court of public opinion, emotion wins when reason stays too long at the mic. So, Rachel made a powerful decision. She stopped explaining. She stopped engaging. She stopped chasing clarity from someone committed to chaos. She chose silence. And that silence? It didn't just protect her peace. It exposed the pattern. Because when you stop feeding the performance, the show can't go on. So the next time someone tries to script you into their drama, ask yourself, is this conflict? Or is it theater? And if it's the latter, step off the stage. Because when it comes to emotional manipulation, stillness speaks louder than defense. But manipulation doesn't just come through words. Sometimes, it hides in charm, disguised as praise. No more defending. No more counter-arguments. Just calm. Just clarity. Just grounded, stoic silence. And over time, something powerful happened. The truth began to surface, not through force, not through explanation, but through observation. People started to notice the pattern. This person always had a new sob story, a fresh enemy, a new injustice. Every week, it was someone else's fault. A never-ending loop of blame, tears, and theatrics. And without anyone having to raise a voice, the act collapsed. Because performances need audiences. But when silence takes the stage, the spotlight fades. And with no one left to impress, the truth finally stands alone. So how do you deal with someone who manipulates through victimhood? First, stop trying to defend yourself. They're not listening, they're performing. They don't want clarity, they want applause. So don't feed the scene. Second, detach emotionally. This isn't about you. It's about their need to control the narrative. So observe. Don't absorb. Let them drown in the storm they've created. You don't have to throw a single stone. Third, trust karma and repetition. Yes, people may believe them once. Maybe even twice. But patterns don't lie. Eventually, the mask slips, and the audience sees behind the curtain. Because the truth? It has patience. It waits for the drama to burn out. Then it rises quietly, without spectacle, without rage. At the end of the day, you don't owe clarity to someone who profits from confusion. Let them play the part. Let them write their script. Let them gather their crowd. And when the show finally ends, and it always does, let your silence bring down the curtain. Because silence doesn't just protect your peace. Sometimes, it ends the performance altogether. But not all betrayals come with drama. Some hurt more because they come with nothing at all. No shouting. No backstabbing. Just slow, quiet neglect. The most painful insult isn't always what people say to you. It's what they stop noticing. The more you try to prove your worth, the less they see it. Not because you're not valuable, but because you're always there. You reply fast. You show up first. You never let the silence linger too long. But here's the paradox no one wants to admit. People don't value what's always available. They value what they fear losing. And if you're always in reach, always giving, always trying. You don't become irreplaceable. You become background noise. Heard, but not noticed. Seen, but not truly valued. This is where Stoicism hands you back the power you forgot was yours. Seneca once said, "Time discovers truth. And sometimes, the truth they need to discover is your absence." Let me tell you a story. There was a man, we'll call him Jake. Jake was that person. The reliable one. The friend who never forgot to check in. The co-worker who remembered birthdays. The partner who always asked about your day. Even when no one asked about his. But over time, Jake began to notice something unsettling. If he didn't send the first message, no one reached out. If he stopped calling, days, then weeks, would pass in silence. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing. He realized something crucial. He wasn't cherished, he was convenient. There's a difference. So Jake made a quiet decision. He didn't explode. He didn't explain. He didn't beg for attention or recognition. He simply stopped. And then? The pattern revealed itself. Most stayed silent. But a few, the real ones, noticed the shift. They called. They asked. They reached out not out of habit, but out of care. That's when Jake finally understood. Your absence teaches what your presence never could. You don't need to overextend to be seen. You need to pull back to let others step forward. So how do you reclaim your worth? First, stop giving to those who only take. Respect is a two-way street, stop walking it alone. Second, recognize your value isn't proven by availability. It's preserved by boundaries. Third, trust that the people who truly care won't need your reminders. They'll feel the shift. And they'll respond to your silence, not with blame, but with effort. Because in the end, it's not about making noise. It's about making meaning. And sometimes, silence carries the message loudest of all. But what about when it's not others who overlook us? What if the loudest rejection comes from within? The ones who didn't notice his silence? They faded. Quietly. Effortlessly. And in that absence, Jake found his answer. No grand goodbye. No dramatic ending. Just space, doing what words never could. So, what do you do when your worth is ignored? First, you stop chasing. You stop throwing lifelines to people who swim away. If they couldn't see your value while you stood in front of them, let them feel the weight of your absence behind them. Second, say nothing. Silence isn't weakness, it's a mirror. It reflects their behavior back at them. And when your steady presence disappears, your value becomes harder to ignore. It echoes in the empty space they once assumed would always be filled. Third, observe. Don't beg. Don't hint. Just watch who notices. Who shifts. Who reaches out, not out of guilt, but out of genuine care. Because the people who matter won't need a signal. They'll feel the change in the air. And they'll step forward. At the end of the day, you don't prove your worth through effort. You prove it through boundaries. Through space. Through silence. Because those who are meant for you will feel the silence. And those who vanish in it were never meant to stay. Let your absence speak the words your presence could never say. Let it ring out in the spaces they took for granted. Let it echo, not with bitterness, but with quiet truth. You were always there. They just didn't see it. And never, ever begged to be noticed by the ones who chose to close their eyes. But here's the twist. Some people don't ignore you out of neglect. They provoke you on purpose. They want a reaction, and that's the thing about silence, it doesn't just speak. It disarms. It dismantles. It strips away the illusions others hide behind. But here's where Stoicism becomes your shield. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That single line contains the essence of self-mastery. You can't stop people from poking at your peace. You can't control their pettiness or their thirst for conflict. But what you can control: your response. Or better yet, your lack of one. Let me tell you a story. There was a man, we'll call him Adam. He worked alongside someone who thrived on drama. Every meeting was a stage. Every interaction, a performance. There were always subtle jabs. A sarcastic comment. A veiled insult. A smirk wrapped in professional language. Just vague enough to avoid HR. But sharp enough to sting. At first, Adam played the game. He defended himself. He explained. He justified. And every time, he walked out of those meetings drained, emotionally and mentally. Like he'd been in a fight no one else could see. Until one day, Adam changed his script. The next time the co-worker struck, Adam simply looked up. Offered a faint, knowing smile. Gave a calm nod. And said absolutely nothing. No tension. No eye roll. No sigh. No flare of anger. Just quiet, composed detachment. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. The co-worker flinched. Because when you're used to playing with fire, you panic when the match doesn't light. Adam didn't just withhold words, he withheld fuel. And with no energy to feed on, the flame died out. Slowly. Permanently. So, how do you handle provocation in your life? First, recognize the pattern. Repetition reveals motive. If someone always stirs conflict, it's not personal, it's strategic. Their goal isn't resolution, it's reaction. Second, hold your frame. Stay grounded. Don't let emotional bait pull you out of alignment with who you are. Your calm is your power, and your stillness is your weapon. Third, let detachment become your default. When you're no longer emotionally hooked, you become untouchable. And that's when you stop being a target. Because you're no longer part of the game. But there's another kind of provocation. One that hits deeper than sarcasm or workplace drama. One that challenges your identity, your value, your path. And when you hold your frame, when you choose calm over chaos, you reclaim power most people don't even realize they're giving away. You control your breath. You control your tone. You control your presence. Third, and maybe most important, let your calm become your power. Because the more unshakable you are, the more powerless they feel. Not from anything you've said, but from what you didn't. Because here's the truth. Not everything that provokes you deserves your energy. And not every opponent is worth a response. In fact, the strongest man in the room, he isn't the one shouting over everyone else. He's the one everyone tries to provoke. And no one can move. Why? Because his silence isn't empty. It's armor. It's presence. It's control. It's the kind of energy that doesn't need to prove itself, because it's already proven. And while the world spins around in noise and emotion, he stays centered. But there's something else silence does. Something more haunting. Something louder than any scream or any insult. It creates space for regret. You see, there comes a moment after they've taken you for granted. After they've ignored your value. After they assumed you'd always be there. When they suddenly realize you're gone. And that silence they once overlooked, now it's deafening. They start to remember the way you listened. The way you showed up. The way you gave, over and over, more than you ever received. And it hits them like a wave. They didn't just lose a person. They lost a presence. A light. A constant. But by the time they feel it, it's too late. Here's what you need to understand. If someone only starts to value you after you leave, they never truly valued you when it counted. They valued your convenience, not your character. They loved the benefits, not the being. And when the silence settles in, when there's no more messages, no more check-ins, no more quiet support behind the scenes, that's when the truth hits hardest. But there's one more kind of silence. A deeper, sharper kind. One that follows abandonment. And here's the part that hurts the most. When they finally realize what they lost. And you're tempted to go back. But the worst thing you can do is return to the very place that taught you how to live without it. Just because they noticed now doesn't mean they understand. Just because they apologize doesn't mean they've changed. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And self-mastery means this. You don't go back to places that broke you. You don't lower your standards just to comfort someone else's guilt. You don't explain your silence. You let it speak for you. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman, we'll call her Olivia. She gave everything to her relationship. Her time, her energy, her love. She was present, committed, consistent. And her partner? He got comfortable. He assumed she'd always be there. He stopped seeing her. Until one day, she left. No explosion. No dramatic goodbye. No final plea. Just a quiet exit. Calm, clean, and complete. At first, he brushed it off. Assumed she'd be back. He even joked to his friends. She just needs space. But then the weeks passed. Then months. And her silence stayed. No messages. No answers. Just the echo of a presence he never realized he'd relied on. Until it was gone. He begged. He apologized. He promised change. But by then, Olivia had already healed. Not loudly, but silently. And that silence had become her freedom. So what do you do when someone finally regrets losing you? First, don't make it easy for them to return. If they couldn't see your worth when you were giving, they don't get rewarded when you're gone. Let your absence remain visible. Let it echo. Second, resist the urge to explain. You don't need to cushion their fall with your closure. Let them feel it. Let them sit with it. Third, and most importantly, stand firm in your silence. Not from bitterness, but from self-respect. Because at the end of the day, they had access to your kindness, your loyalty, your light, and they wasted it. Now, let them sit with that truth. Alone. Because silence isn't punishment. It's wisdom. It says, you don't get to walk in and out of my life and still expect the door to stay open. Let them regret. Let them remember. But don't let them return. You don't owe them a second chance. You owe yourself peace. You don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need to fight to win. And you don't need to speak to make a statement. In a world addicted to noise, silence is radical. And now, there's one more form of silence we need to talk about. The kind that doesn't end relationships, but redefines them forever. It's not weakness. It's not surrender. It's strength in its quietest, most commanding form. It's the language of those who have outgrown the need for approval. Those who no longer seek applause. Just alignment. Because when you fall silent, you're not giving up. You're taking your power back. You're stepping off the battlefield where they hoped you'd bleed for validation. You're walking away from the trap where explanation is used as manipulation. And instead of arguing, you let something far stronger speak for you. Time, truth, and karma. You don't write the final sentence. You don't slam the door. You simply stop. And that's where the shift happens. A Stoic doesn't chase approval. He doesn't beg for understanding. He doesn't break down under noise or reach out to be rescued. He steps back. He breathes. He holds. He lets the universe do what it does best. Restore balance in ways no words ever could. So the next time someone lies to your face, betrays your trust, insults your soul, provokes your peace, or regrets losing you, don't explain. Don't defend. Don't react. Observe. Let them twist. Let them wonder. Let them unravel without you. Because karma doesn't need your help. It doesn't need your hands. It doesn't need your voice. It just needs your silence. And eventually, inevitably, what's meant to be seen will be revealed. And what's meant to fall away will collapse under its own weight. So if this message stirred something inside you, if you felt the truth humming between the pauses, then don't just click away. There's one more step. One more lesson waiting in the next video. That may change the way you carry yourself forever. I'll see you there. Not every battle deserves your voice. Not every insult needs an answer. And not every betrayal deserves your energy. There are moments in life when silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. When walking away isn't defeat, it's strength. This is the Stoic way, to know when to act, and when to let karma finish the sentence for you. In this video, we explore the powerful philosophy of strategic silence, when speaking only feeds the fire, and the real mastery is in restraint. Through Stoic teachings from Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, you'll learn how to stop explaining yourself to those who only want to misunderstand. Rise above toxic behavior without being dragged into it. Trust that what goes around truly comes around. Let go of the need for revenge, and find power in presence. Use silence not as escape, but as a declaration of strength. Sometimes, your silence shouts louder than your words ever could. This is more than stoicism. This is reclaiming your peace. This is trusting that the universe, time, and truth always settle the score. If you've ever been hurt, betrayed, or misunderstood, stay. This message was made for you.